to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Monday, November 20th. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman, Associate Editor of the Electronic Intifada, along with my colleagues John Elmer and our Executive Director, Ali Abunimah. Asa Winstanley is traveling today. We have a very full show for you and a lot of updates from the last few days across Palestine, so please stay tuned. Before we go to our first guest, Ali, let's hear your opening remarks.
Hi, Nora. Even the most cursory scan of the news any day, any hour for the last 45 days reveals horrors from Gaza, each of which by itself would once have made global headlines. Today, for example, it is reported that at least 12 people have been killed by Israeli shelling of the Indonesian hospital, the last functioning hospital in northern Gaza. Israel is laying siege to the hospital where once again hundreds of patients, medical staff, and displaced people are trapped, as it has done at other hospitals in recent days. In two separate attacks reported on Saturday in Jabalia refugee camp, Israel bombed two residential buildings, killing 50 and 32 people, respectively, according to the UN. We no longer even know the exact death toll because of the collapse of communications and services in Gaza. But as the UN notes, the last official count as of November 10 days ago, was over 11,000 people killed in Gaza. The human rights group Euromed estimates that the true death toll is closer to 20,000, with thousands of people missing under the rubble with little hope of survival. This would mean that Israel has now exterminated 1% of the population of Gaza in just 40 days. What passes for good news these days is that 28 surviving premature babies from Al-Shifa hospital have arrived in Egypt. 3 babies remain at the Emirati hospital in Gaza. All the surviving babies are fighting serious infections and continue to need health care, according to a World Health Organization official. 5 of the babies had died in previous days due to the cutoff of electricity and fuel by Israel, according to the UN. And on Sunday, the UN reported that in the previous 24 hours, Israeli attacks had killed 6 journalists, bringing to almost 50 the number of Palestinian journalists killed since the launch of Israel's genocide. In the West Bank, it's hard to keep up with the daily raids on towns and refugee camps and the mounting toll of death and destruction there. Israel is adept at turning the exceptional, the unthinkable, into the normal. I was struck by the comments of Ibrahim Frehat, an associate professor at the Doha Institute. He said, "We started with the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital. It was bombed. There was an outcry over this, and Israel denied it. But then there was another attack, and it was received with no reaction from the international community because they got used to it. Now Israel is bombing hospitals and not even giving an explanation," Frehat said. He observed that the same pattern holds with Israel's attacks on schools. He says the first school attack was also received with international condemnation. But then on Saturday, Israel bombed 2 schools in northern Gaza, Al-Fakhura, and another one in Tel Za'atar. Frehat observed, even Israel is not claiming that there are Hamas fighters hiding there and is giving no explanation whatsoever. Israel pushes as far as it thinks it can go, when it receives no reaction, it pushes further. How much further will it go in this genocide? How much further does Israel want to go? Well, here's one indication. In the Jerusalem Post on November 19th, Israel's intelligence minister Ghila Gamliel wrote an op-ed with the upbeat-sounding headline, "Victory is an opportunity for Israel in the midst of crisis." This is the same intelligence ministry that authored a secret document which leaked a few weeks ago, planning for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza's population to Egypt under the guise of humanitarian intervention. Now Gamliel is making this proposal in the open. Gamliel writes, quote, instead of funneling money to rebuild Gaza or to the failed UNRWA, the international community can assist in the costs of resettlement, helping the people of Gaza build new lives in their new host countries, end quote. Ethnic cleansing never sounded so friendly. And there's another article also published on November 19th in 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, one of Israel's leading newspapers. It's by Giora Eiland, a senior research associate at the Institute for National Security Studies, a retired Israeli major general and former head of the Israeli National Security Council. Here's what Eiland writes. The way to win the war faster and at a lower cost for us requires a system collapse on the other side and not the mere killing of more Hamas fighters. The international community warns us of a humanitarian disaster in Gaza and of severe epidemics. We must not shy away from this, as difficult as that may be. After all, severe epidemics in the south of the Gaza Strip will bring victory closer and reduce casualties among IDF soldiers. And no, this is not about cruelty for cruelty's sake, since we don't support the suffering of the other sides as a goal, but as a means. End quote. As you can see, Israeli leaders are capable of rationalizing literally anything, while at the same time shamelessly describing themselves as the light, and the Palestinians they are busy exterminating as the darkness. And they are joined in this by most politicians in the West. If this is not genocide, the word has no meaning. But imagine if you could stop a genocide with a single act. Would you do it? Of course you would. That's what we're all taught to believe, that each of us is a good person who, if they had the chance to go back in history and do the one thing that could have stopped a past Holocaust, of course we would do it. I want to read you something that people have been sharing on social media in recent days. Perhaps you have seen it. It's an excerpt from a 2014 book called The Reagan Paradox by Lou Cannon. It recounts a well-known episode during Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon and siege of Beirut. Here's what Cannon writes. Reagan, who had considered Israel a trustworthy ally, was disgusted with what was happening in Lebanon. Israel's 10-week siege culminated with its planes bombing West Beirut for 11 consecutive hours on August 12th. At the suggestion of White House Deputy Chief of Staff Michael Deaver, Reagan called Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. Menachem, this is a Holocaust, Reagan said. Mr. President, I think I know what a Holocaust is, Begin replied in a sarcastic voice. Reagan refused to give ground, bluntly telling Begin he had to stop the bombing. 20 minutes later, Begin called back, saying he had ordered Ariel Sharon to halt the attacks. Reagan thanked him, hung up, and said to Deaver, I didn't know I had that kind of power. End quote. I don't want to paint Ronald Reagan as some sort of saint. He certainly wasn't. And it was American betrayals in the days and weeks that followed that would lead to the massacre under Israeli oversight of thousands of Palestinian refugees at the Sabra and Shatila camps by Israeli-backed Lebanese militias. The point is that one man does have the power today to pick up the phone and order Benjamin Netanyahu to stop the bombing, to stop the genocide. That man is, of course, Joe Biden. Everyone knows that without the round-the-clock airlift from the United States, Israel would run out of bombs to drop on Palestinian children in days or weeks. But that's not who Joe Biden is. And it's not who Joe Biden has ever been. Let's go back again to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Shortly after that war, Menachem Begin met with members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in Washington. When he got back to occupied Jerusalem, Begin told Israeli reporters, quote, a young senator rose and delivered a very impassioned speech. I must say that it's been a while since I've heard such a talented speaker, and he actually supported Operation Peace for Galilee, end quote. Of course, Operation Peace for Galilee is the name Israel gave its bloodbath in Lebanon. The young senator that Begin was referring to, Joe Biden, said he would go even further than Israel, that he'd forcefully fend off anyone who sought to invade his country, even if that meant killing women or children. I dissociated myself from these remarks, Begin said. I said to him, "No, sir, attention must be paid. According to our values, it is forbidden to hurt women and children, even in war. Sometimes there are casualties among the civilian population as well, but it is forbidden to aspire to this. This is a yardstick of human civilization, not to hurt civilians." Of course, Begin was lying. Israel has always murdered men, women, and children without thought and with total impunity. But even for Menachem Begin, the former Irgun terrorist, Biden's pro-Israel extremism was too much to openly associate himself with. Biden hasn't changed, and sadly, nor has the rest of the American ruling class. If anything, their unconditional support for Israel is even more extreme, turbocharged now with Christian Zionist fanaticism. And people are noticing. President Joe Biden's approval rating has declined to the lowest level of his presidency, 40%, as strong majorities of all voters disapprove of his handling of foreign policy and the Israel-Hamas war, according to the latest national NBC News poll. That network reported on Sunday. NBC adds, and I quote, "The erosion for Biden is most pronounced among Democrats, a majority of whom believe Israel has gone too far in its military action in Gaza, and among voters aged 18 to 34, with a whopping 70% of them disapproving of Biden's handling of the war." This poll is a stunner, and it's stunning because of the impact the Israel-Hamas war is having on Biden, says Bill McInturff of Public Opinion Strategies, one of the pollsters that conducted this survey. I don't mention this because I care about Joe Biden's approval rating or how he or his party are going to do in this or that election. I mention it as a reminder of how even here in the United States, the vast majority of people are utterly horrified by what Israel and the Biden administration are doing in Gaza, despite the barrage of propaganda telling the public that the mass extermination of Palestinian children is just Israel exercising its alleged right to self-defense. It is this popular disgust and anger expressed all over the world that remains the main hope for people in Gaza and for us. The one message that all our friends in Gaza keep repeating whenever they can reach us is to stay in the streets, to keep protesting, to keep calling your representatives. Don't take the pressure off. People in Gaza are counting on you. They're counting on all of us together.
Thank you so much, Ali. We are now joined by Ahmed Massoud, an award-winning Palestinian and British writer from Gaza living in London. Ahmed is the author of the novels Vanished and The Shroud Maker. His family is originally from the Palestinian village of Deir Isneid, and he grew up in Gaza. Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us today on the Electronic Intifada.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
First off, this is the question that we have to ask. If you could talk about your family in Gaza right now, specifically your relatives inside the Jabalia refugee camp, and your overall reaction to the last nearly 50 days of this genocide so far.
Sure. I mean, I wish I could summarize it in like a very coherent sentence. Every day is a roller coaster of emotions, as you can imagine. My immediate concern is the safety of my family, my siblings, all of them, about 8 of them in the Jabalia camp. I've got one sister in the middle of Gaza Strip in the Nusayrat area, and my mum as well, who's still there in Jabalia camp in the north. I spent the entire day today on messages with them and with my sister, trying to kind of determine what the situation is and whether they should leave Jabalia camp or not. Neither option is any good at all. Leaving is not an option. Staying is not an option. As you have described, and as the news has been reporting, Israel has been bombing houses indiscriminately and taking out entire neighborhoods. So a lot of innocent people are dying on a daily basis. We've stopped counting the death toll. So I'm really, really stressed about that, of course, and about the idea that they will be bombed on their own, in their own home. Yet at the same time, the main issue with leaving is that my mum's health is not very good. She can't walk. She's an elderly woman. She can't walk for long distances. She needs care, medical care. She needs people to look after her, and it's not very easy for her to leave. My sister is heavily pregnant and she can't easily walk either. Right now, what we know from people who have left and have fled to the south is that you have to walk for at least 10K in order to find a donkey's cart to transport you up to the point where the Israelis have installed checkpoints on Salahuddin Street. This is not possible for my mom. It's practically impossible. She will die walking. And as we know, and the reports have come, that there are many, many incidents where they've been shooting at people who are fleeing to the south, not just shooting, but also bombing. If that happens, my mom will die. So all options are incredibly, incredibly tough. And unfortunately, I feel bad for my brother, where all my siblings are staying at the moment, that he has to make that call. He has to make that decision. I've been trying to support him, trying to message him when I can, but it's quite impossible. And I can't really say much to him in a sense. I can't tell him this is what you should do and or not, because in the end, they have to make that decision. They know better in a way. And actually, to an extent, they don't, because they don't have any communication either. So he's relying on me for information. I'm trying to give it to him, but I can't, help him with that decision at all. This is not right. This is just this. I can't believe that this is happening. I can't believe that people are being expelled out of their homes, out of their safe homes. And B, that this is allowed to happen, and C, that actually even the road and the passage to what is supposed to be a safe place is not even a safe place. And even the supposedly safe space is not safe either. I mean, this is just insane. It's out of out of a fictional story or something from Lord of the Rings in Mordor or something. This is what it is, really. And I find that unbelievable. And I find that the fact that it's continuing to happen, that it is allowed to happen, is just shameful, to be honest with you. Unbelievably shameful to everybody who is allowing it to continue to happen. As for my reaction for the last 44 days of war now, obviously it's been a mixture of emotions, of sadness to have lost this beautiful place called Gaza City, the beaches, the cafes, the people I knew. I lost some cousins. There's been incredible pain and sadness inside me that I can't even begin to articulate, and I haven't had time to even grieve about it. I was in Gaza in May, this last May, so only 6 months ago, sitting on the beach with friends and family, having coffee, having shisha, and just kind of discussing the future and hoping that the future will be bright. But now it all seems to be disappearing off the map. The entire of Gaza City seems to be disappearing off the map. The house I grew up in got bombed recently. I lost some cousins in there, and nothing is going to bring that place and the memories that I had. So yeah, it's been a time of emotions that I cannot really articulate in any possible way. And the most difficult thing this time, and when I say this time is because as a Palestinian from Gaza living outside, unfortunately, we have lived through this agony several times during several wars on Gaza. Apologies, the light is just went off. Just to kind of, I just need to move because it's a sensory thing. Just give me 1 second. Apologies.
It's just impossible to imagine what Ahmed is going through, especially unable to help from afar and unable, but people there are almost helpless as well. And I'm just trying to put myself in his shoes is just impossible to do. And you think about that repeated all over Gaza.
Yeah.
Apologies about the
It's okay.
the lighting, it's just felt like being in Gaza in a way somehow. This is just like a glimpse of it, to be honest with you. But I think, one of the things that I found incredibly difficult this time, and I had never experienced emotions like this in my entire life, even though I'm used to Gaza being attacked, several wars, from 2006, 2008 and 9, 2012, 2014, 2021. Even in this last May, there was another assault on Gaza. The lack of communication, not being able to pick up the phone and check on your mom and say, are you okay? That is just an emotion I never thought I would have to experience, to be honest with you. 48 hours, sometimes 72 hours of nothing. You don't know at the end of it whether your mom will be alive or not and your siblings are alive or not. And that has been incredibly painful. There's nothing in the world that I can describe it, and I really hope none of the listeners and people watching today will ever have to experience that feeling, because you feel so powerless, you feel so angry, you just want to shut down completely. Your system is shutting down completely, and you don't know if you're going to reboot at the end of it or not.
Ahmed, it's we've run out of words to express. We'll need to invent new words, it feels like, to express some of the grief and horror and outrage and anger we feel. Even those of us, I'm very fortunate that I got to visit Gaza once, and over the years I've made many friends in Gaza and from Gaza, and we have our colleagues who we work with in Gaza. And for us, the worry is desperate, and it's hour by hour. You don't know who you're going to hear from. And so for you who have your mom there and your immediate family, it's just unimaginable. But I want to ask you, Ahmed, what are you hearing from them in Jabalia in terms of the day-to-day situation, in terms of basic things like food, water, shelter? What are you hearing from them? Clearly, they're in a desperate enough situation that they're thinking of leaving. But if you can just describe any of the specifics that they're telling you, because I think it's so important to get that on the record.
Yeah, the issue here is that they don't know themselves in a way, so they kind of like, it's almost going to the market, to the neighborhood to buy stuff, but they're going blind in a sense, because they don't know what is available and what's not. They don't know if there are supplies or not. So my brother tells me that he goes to the market, whatever he finds in there, which is nothing, he just gets it and then hopes to make something out of it in a sense. The shops are either closed or have their shelves empty because nothing has got into the north at all. There are some sort of basic sort of supplies that they've had, like a sack of flour that they've stored, a long time ago, some lentils that they've been eating a lot of lentils. But really they can't go and buy stuff. There isn't enough food for them. And right now it's getting worse because, as I said, most of my siblings and my mom and their kids and their families are at his place. So he has to feed about 65 people, so, and he can't find enough food for all those people. In terms of water, they tell me that the water comes in every 5 days for 1 hour. they have the water, so they have to fill every possible vessel in the house to make sure that they store it for 5 days. But again, they don't know if it's going to come, what time it's going to come. Are they going to be asleep? Are they going to be awake? Or, how long for? How much can they fill? So it's kind of that darkness that they're living in themselves, that they don't know what is going on, even within their immediate neighborhood. Like I said, a few days ago, one of my cousin's house was bombed. We still don't know up until this time. We know one of them was killed, but we don't know the rest of our cousins. They're close cousins. We don't know how many. Like, we know one person, but then his brothers and sisters and his kids and all of that, we don't know that yet, because people are not leaving. They're not leaving their homes, and obviously the news is not reporting. We've stopped reporting the names of the dead, so you don't know what's going on. So I'm trying to support them with that and kind of send them information as much as possible, kind of keeping an eye on the news, keeping an eye on what people are talking about. I'm connected with friends in there as well, keeping sort of network of information for them, because that is important as well. And I think the main thing now is there going to be a ceasefire or not? Sometimes they beg me just say, like, can you tell us, is there a ceasefire? And I'm like, I can't really tell you because there isn't. Unfortunately, I would love to, And then they send me sort of news headlines and they say, is this true? There's talk of a humanitarian pause. Is this true? And I'm like, I really, let me look, let me check for you. But again, all of that with communication being so bad, I got an eSIM for them, which barely works, and they have to go up to the roof to send messages, and the roof is not safe, it's dangerous. So it's really, really, really painful at the moment. And again, the other thing that they're talking a lot about is this another Nakba or not? That's what they're worried about. They're really worried about that, and the loss of their homes and being ethnically cleansed and becoming refugees yet again. We grew up in a refugee camp, and to actually become refugees again is a nightmare for them. My niece is studying to be a doctor at Al-Azhar University, which has now been bombed. So she already knows that her future there is almost destroyed. She's excellent with her education. She really wants to become a successful doctor, and she's begging me. She's telling me, please don't let my dad, my brother, don't let him leave. Like, I want to stay here. I don't want to become a refugee. I don't want to go into a refugee camp, in a school with no food, with people I don't know. I would rather stay here in my house. But then, how can you make that decision? How can you, like, if they get bombed in their own home, like, I can't convince my brother to stay, and I can't convince him to leave. So people are really worried about this idea of a new Nakba, which is really what it's looking like at the moment. It's ethnic cleansing. That's what they're doing. They're bombing hospitals, schools, infrastructure, government buildings, everything, just so that the north becomes inhabitable in a sense. And it's becoming more and more obvious every day. Gaza City is a ghost town at the moment. There are a lot of people still there, by the way. They're estimated around 800,000 people are still in the north. So, and that's a large number of people who need medical care, who need education, who need infrastructure to support them. As you mentioned as well in your intro, they're now asking people in the south to evacuate to a small area, which is called Mawasi, which is on the beach, which is about 1 mile long. So they want the entire of the Gaza Strip, which is 2.3 million people, to move to that 1 mile strip. I mean, how is that possible? How is this even allowed to happen? This is just terrorism and terrorizing people. So I think a lot of what my family are thinking about at the moment is, do I have food or water? Yes, they're thinking about that. There is a sense of community in Jabalia camp, by the way, that people are coming together. Whoever's got flour, they're baking for the whole street. Whoever's got lentils, they're making like big pots and distributing. People have an amazing sense of community and coming together. Whoever's got water is kind of giving gallons to others, so there's a bit of that. So it is a priority in a sense, but I think the immediate priority really are two things. One is there a ceasefire? And then the other one is this another Nakba or not? We don't want to lose our homes. My brother now is telling me, like, he doesn't want to leave my mum, so he can't leave my mum behind. But yet, if he takes her with him and something happens, he'll be responsible. I don't know. Would you leave? What would you decide? And my brain is about to explode today because I've just been sitting here in the office at work in London, kind of working through so many things and trying to think, like, what shall I tell him? And clearly, he wants a direction somehow. He wants an advice from his brother who's in London now. But I feel like if I give him anything, it's going to be the wrong one, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, these are impossible decisions that anyone should not be asked to make, and I can understand kind of delegating to someone who's not there. Just tell me what I need to do.
I get those
Yeah.
questions
Yeah.
from some of our friends and colleagues in Gaza. They ask me, is there going to be a ceasefire? And all I can say is this is what we're hearing in the news. And in fact, over the last couple of days, over the weekend, there were reports that an agreement was reached for a 5-day ceasefire, and that there were just a few details to work out, and then it seems to have evaporated. Whether it will materialize, we don't know, but people are desperate for a break from this. Of course, they want it to stop, but they will accept any kind of break that just allows them even to catch their breath. It sounds like. Ahmed, you are a Palestinian whose family is in Gaza, and you're in London. Can you describe what that is like, for better or for worse? We've spoken previously to our friend Ahmed 𝐓𝐡𝐞 who's in Dublin now, and he talked about the small community of people from Gaza there and how they support each other while also going through all of this trauma that you also described. At the same time, we're seeing some of the biggest rallies in support of Palestinians anywhere in the world taking place in London. What's it like for you?
Very good question. I mean, I think it's been agony, of course, for me. Like I said, most of us Palestinians from Gaza who are outside, we are kind of used to wars on Gaza in a sense. It's not the first time, unfortunately, or second time or third time. So I feel sort of obviously lucky and privileged to be here and to be safe and to be able to use my voice to speak about the situation and to present, my family's suffering and try to make a difference, to influence people to think about the human side of things and about us as people and about our stories as well. I think to start with, to be honest with you, I didn't speak to anybody. I didn't want to engage, especially with media. I think one of the problems why we're here today is because of Western media and the way they treated us and the way they presented us and the kind of license they gave to Israel to do what they like, and that's why we're here. And to an extent, it's still kind of the same. The Israelis are not questioned, they're not challenged, especially after they've come to Al-Shifa hospital, they're not held accountable. And if governments don't do that and the media doesn't, then nobody does, to be honest with you. So I kind of disengaged myself from Western media completely, and up to this point, I boycotted the BBC. They kind of begged me to be on shows, and I said no. I had a play on, and one of them bought a ticket to come and actually see my show, and cornered me afterwards to actually come and talk on her show, and I said no because they were part of the problem. But now I think I'm feeling a bit sort of more comfortable with the kind of community support and the network support around us, and also seeing so many people going on the streets demonstrating, as you said, in London, and the large numbers, calling for Palestinian rights and for our freedom and for a ceasefire. The main thing is a ceasefire. That's what we're asking for. I'm reassured by that, and I think this is a message to send to people who go and demonstrate that actually your voice is very important to us, not just people in Gaza, but also people from Gaza who are outside and Palestinians everywhere, because it sends a strong signal that we're not alone, we're not on our own, we don't have to hide somewhere. Like at the beginning of the events, as you may remember, many Palestinian events were cancelled, our voices were being silenced immediately, and I think now we regained our voice a little bit thanks to the support of so many people who went on the streets and saw what was happening and what was coming as well. But also the other thing to mention is that for us, Gaza, like I grew up in Gaza and I moved to London in 2002, but Gaza has always been a point of, agony and pain and sadness in a sense, because it's gone through so many wars. Every time I go to Gaza, it takes me about 3 days to get there, sleeping on checkpoints, going from Cairo to Gaza. I have a British passport. I'm not allowed to go through any other means apart from the Rafah border because I have the Gaza ID. It takes 3 days to kind of cross. My dad passed away in February. I missed his funeral for that reason. I couldn't go to say goodbye to my dad. We've always been suffering silently about Gaza. It's always been a painful thing that we hold within us. Proudly, we hold it proudly, yet at the same time, it just kind of every day that Gaza was under siege, a piece of us was falling off, and I think nobody was noticing that. And I think it's important to remember this in this context. Now those pieces are falling very quickly and very, abundantly in a sense. And I just want things to stop now. I want ceasefire, but I also want the whole situation in Gaza and Palestine and the Palestinian rights for freedom to be upheld and to actually get to a settlement where we finish this, we end this once and for all, please, because we can't take this anymore.
Ahmed, I'm so sorry to hear about your father, and on top of everything else, not to have been able to go and not to have been able to be there to support your mother and the rest of your family is an additional agony. Ahmed, I want to show you something. You've probably already seen it because it's gone viral. This is a clip that was posted by Kan, the Israeli national television network, the equivalent of the BBC in Israel, and it's a song by Israeli children who are said to come from the so-called Gaza envelope, some of the colonial settlements near the Gaza boundary. Let's take a look at it and then let's get your reaction. We're going to cue it up now and show you a little bit of it. I don't think we're going to look at the whole thing. So here we go. Yeah. So it goes on like that for another 2 minutes or so, which we will spare ourselves.
Yeah.
What do you think when you see cute children with angelic voices singing words like that? Is that something you ever expected to see in your life?
I saw that, I think yesterday or so, and I was thinking, like, imagine if these were brown children, from Gaza, singing the same on the other side. Just imagine, just put yourself in that kind of moment and imagine where it would be reported, where it would be shown. This clip wasn't shown on the BBC, wasn't shown anywhere on Western media. We saw it on social media because it was captured there. Just imagine and put that sort of situation and what they would say about us. It's a shame. I felt sorry for those children. I really felt sorry for those children because of the propaganda, because of the indoctrination of that. And then I thought, these are the soldiers that will, these are the kind of kids that will grow one day, maybe become soldiers, because as you know, national service in Israel is mandatory, so most of them are likely to serve in the army. And I thought these are the ones who are probably going to be on the checkpoints, and these are the ones who are probably have to, point at an elderly Palestinian man with his walking stick to cross the checkpoint. And these are the same kids who later on will look at that old man and probably shoot him, or that pregnant woman and not allow her to get either the care. These were my thoughts, and I just thought, why? Like, why do you need to do that? Why don't you try something else for a change? Like, you've been trying this same approach for a long time. Let's just think about, why don't we just talk about peace for a second? Why don't we talk about what if those children were singing to Palestinian children in Gaza? Apologies about the lights, just keeps going off, and there's nothing I can do about it because the switch is really far. So imagine if those kids were just singing for peace and a message to children in Gaza, a message of support, of some sort of support, or whatever it is. Wouldn't it give a different signal? But no, unfortunately, this is the approach. This is the approach that the Israelis have taken. This is an official approach by the Israeli government, not just the children, but also their ministers who threatened of a nuclear bomb, of their religious leaders, of their entire government. They do have a right-wing government that nobody is talking about at all, by the way. And I just wish that this wasn't shown at all, to be honest with you, because it hurts a lot that a child is singing for our annihilation and destruction and genocide. Who teaches a child something like this? So it was painful. It was really painful to see. I couldn't finish it, to be honest with you. Like, I just saw half of it, 1 minute of it or something, and I just had to stop it because it's impossible to watch, to be honest. And that was shown on national media. They're, as you said, the equivalent of BBC in Israel. I really hope that at some point when this whole thing is over, that somebody will come and think, well, again, let's try a different approach with Gaza and Palestine. Let's see what happens if we give them all their rights. Let's see what happens if we give them a state, if we open their economy, if they have an airport, if they have, settlements are gone, the wall is removed. Let's see what happens. Let's try that for 2 or 3 years or 5 years, and then see what happens. If it doesn't work, we'll go back, because clearly they can invade anytime. Clearly they can destroy at any time. That's really my hope at the end of this, and I have to hold on to hope, because otherwise I have nothing to hold on to.
Well, Ahmed, Masood, we want to thank you so much for joining us today on the Electronic Intifada live stream. Where can people get in touch with you, read your work, and keep in touch?
Sure. I've got a website which I can put in the chat. 1 second. Can they see my chat if I
no, but we can put it up on the screen.
Sure. I'll just put my website in there and you can post it. And I'm also on social media, of course, Instagram and all these things. I can put that to in here.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. We appreciate it, and we keep your family and all the families in Gaza in our thoughts and in our prayers all the time.
Thank you, and keep doing what you're doing. It's important to tell the story and show the truth as well.
Thanks so much, Ahmed. We are now going to turn to our good friend Yusuf Al-Jamal. Yusuf is a Palestinian whose family was ethnically cleansed from the town of Acre near Lid in 1948. Yusuf grew up in Gaza's Nuseirat refugee camp where his family remains, and he joins us from Turkey. Yusuf, thank you so much for being back on the live stream with us.
Thank you for having me.
Same question I asked Ahmed. How is your family doing, especially in Nuseirat? What is the situation with them right now?
My family is lucky enough because they did not have to move south. They live just a mile away from the Gaza Valley, and they stayed in their home. But at the same time, they have multiple people from the South itself, who had to evacuate their houses and leave, either because of very close bombardment or because their own houses were bombed, such as the house of my father's cousins, where 9 people were killed. Um, my family is lucky because they have flour. They got a sack of flour today. They were very happy that they finally got it at a very expensive price, where aid into Gaza hasn't got for the past 45 days, and people have to struggle. Where Israel bombed the peace mills company in Deir al-Balah. This is, a myth where Israel is trying to promote and tell people that the South is safe. Move south from the north. Palestinian poet Mus'ab Abu Toha, according to his wife and brother, tried to move south today, and he was arrested by Israeli forces at one of the checkpoints on his way to the south. His child is an American citizen, and he was instructed to go to Rafah crossing in order to be able to leave. But again, he was arrested. There is no safe place in Gaza, and my family is struggling to get clean water. My family is they have no idea about what's going on around them. Even in Nusayrat itself, they get their news from me because there is a complete blackout when I can communicate with them every time, and then I had to make multiple calls to multiple numbers to be able to speak to them. And this is my daily struggle outside Gaza, being able to reach out to my family just to ask them if they're okay or not. Meanwhile, I have to watch the news, and I update them on what's going on in Nusayrat itself. They're not aware. They hear the bombs. No one is leaving their house because it's very risky and dangerous. And when I had the chance, I update them on what's going on, whose house was bombed, who was killed, etc., etc. But again, compared to many Palestinians in Gaza who were forcibly displaced to the south, my family is lucky. We lost a total of 10 people so far in this genocide. And as Ahmed said, it's a reminder of Nakba of 1948. People are worried that they're going to become refugees again in their life. Even my sister, who lives in Maghazi refugee camp, she doesn't know what's going on with my family, and I call her and I update her on my family. Um, People have no means of communication. Sometimes when they can, they text each other, they call each other, but this is not the case, and most of the time. And they count on their relatives outside who have some access, and they can call from time to time to inform them. And even, being able to sustain your battery, like people are back to very basic means of, like my brother uses his car to charge a battery that my family could use to charge their phones, and soon he will run out of fuel. So this is not sustainable. And my mom told me today that she's back to washing clothes and laundry, and like using the most basic ways and means, her hand. And she's also cooking on fire. People are back to the 70s and 60s in Gaza. And this is what Israel said. The Israeli army said they will bring Gaza back 50 years back, and this is what they did.
It's unbearable. I'm so sorry, Yusuf. Can you talk also about your friend, also a contributor to the Electronic Intifada, Raed Kadura, and what happened to him and his family?
So yesterday, Raed was with his family, his extended family, his parents, his siblings, and his wife and children, and his wife just gave birth 2 weeks ago. She had to go cesarean, surgery without anesthesia because of the lack of anesthesia at Gaza's hospitals. And she survived that. She gave birth to beautiful twins, two daughters, and Israel bombed their house. Everyone in the house, almost everyone in the house was killed. 29 people were killed, including Ra'id, his newly born daughters, his son, and his other daughter. Total of 4 children. His wife is said to be in a very critical situation and injury. He also, Ra'id, lost his parents. I just saw a post on Facebook of Ra'id celebrating his father's 70 year birthday or anniversary. All these lives were cut short. Ra'id was a young and aspiring academic. He finished his BA from the Al-Aqsa University in Gaza. He obtained a BA in English language and literature. He liked literature and translation. He is the co-translator of the Prisoner's Diaries, Palestinian Voices from the Israeli Gulag, which was published in Malaysia. He co-translated the book with me. We spent a lot of time together. We were working at the Hashim Sani library in Gaza for almost 2 years, and then I left Gaza to do my MA just a semester before Ra'id did. Ra'id later joined me at the same university, University of Malaya in Malaysia, where he also met Ali. He finished his MA there, and then he started his PhD at UKM, the National University of Malaysia. He spent a total of 8 years in Malaysia working on his postgraduate studies. Once he finished his PhD, he went back to Gaza and he kept looking for jobs. He started writing for different websites, including the Electronic Intifada. But then he couldn't find a job, so he applied to work as a teacher, a job that someone with a BA can do in Kuwait, and he started working there for almost a year. Then he returned back to Gaza to visit, and he stayed there up until when Israel started the most recent genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. And then his house was bombed, and he lost his life along with his extended family. What is happening to the Palestinian people, and academics are part of the Palestinian people, is very tragic in many different ways. In another country, Ra'id would be an academic with aspiring career. He published journal articles, book reviews. You can find him on Google Scholar. But then, the life and the future of this young academic was cut short by an Israeli bombardment that not only ended his life, but also the life of his extended family. Almost every single one in his extended family was killed. It's very tragic, and today we honor Ra'id, and many people like Ra'id. We honor 13,300 Palestinians who were counted so far by Palestinians in Gaza as victims of Israel's ongoing genocide, let alone thousands of others who are still under the rubble. I remember Ra'id very well. In Malaysia, we took many trips together. He was a person with a sense of humor. He was very kind. He would help young people, like students especially, moving to Malaysia from Gaza. He would take them around and register for them, trying to help them to start their lives. He also dedicated some of his time, as I said, to promoting the Palestinian cause. He co-translated the Prisoner's Diaries, a book on Palestinian political prisoners. But unfortunately, his life was cut short, and we honor him today because there are multiple people, even the Islamic University and Al-Azhar University, where Ra'ed did his BA, were completely destroyed in Gaza. So Israel's war on Palestinian academics and young intellectuals is part and parcel of this genocide, because a lot of these young academics and researchers and young people on social media, they're telling the story to the outside world, and Israel is trying to silence them.
Yusuf, you mentioned that I met Ra'ed in Malaysia. I believe that was in around 2015 or 2016. And I had come to Kuala Lumpur for a conference, and I think it was at the University of Malaya.
Yes.
And I remember meeting a group of students from Gaza there, among them Ra'ed. And what I remember most, of course, I remember Ra'ed is a very kind, gentle, friendly person. I remember sitting and we ate together. But what I really remember from all of the young people I met from Gaza is how much you all laughed, how much humor there was, and how much happiness. And happiness not because everything was fine in the world, but happiness because I felt like you were a group of young people who really wanted to get the best from life, for yourselves and for your families, and that you had left your families in Gaza to look for opportunities that would allow you to achieve things in the world and to support them and make them proud of you. And I know that they're proud of you. And Ra'ed went back to Gaza to make a future there for himself and his family, because he believed in Gaza, he believed in Palestine, and like so many young people and elderly people and newborn babies, Israel doesn't care for their lives. But we honor Ra'ed as much as we honor all of the people who Israel has murdered. Yusuf, I want to ask you a question, if I may, about a mutual friend of ours, a dear friend, someone we love very much, and who's been with us on this podcast, on this live stream, is 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜. Rifat is a teacher. I'm going to ask you to talk about him. I'm just going to update people with two things. He wrote an article for us a few days ago that I think we can put up on the screen. I don't think we prepared it before, but Tamara will be able to find it while I'm talking. Thank you, Tamara. Rifat sent me an SMS message on Saturday, which it's been very, very difficult to reach him. He and his family have been displaced several times. He did send me a message on Saturday saying we are fine, and making a joke, believe it or not. Rifat, I shared it with you, Yusuf. And he wrote this article for us about how his family left the area of the Rantisi hospital, and exposing some of the lies Israel has told. But Rifat, through everything that he's gone through, including the bombing of his house, including the loss of family members, including being displaced several times, has not stopped writing, and has not stopped, I would say, effectively being our editor in Gaza, sending us articles from different people, helping them to write articles so that they can express what they're going through, sending articles any way he can, including by WhatsApp. I think you'll agree with me that Rifat is an extraordinary person, one of many extraordinary people in Gaza. But I just wanted you, because Rifat can't be with us today, just to talk about the work he has done over the years, because we have had the privilege of publishing so many writers from Gaza who have come to us through 𝐓𝐡𝐞, and I feel like we should learn a little bit more from someone who knows him better than almost anyone else.
I met 𝐓𝐡𝐞 for the first time at the Islamic University of Gaza. He was my lecturer, and I attended some of his classes, and he was one of the toughest lecturers I have met in my life. But I learned a lot of things from him. He was very tough, and he was not very generous with grades and marks. And but at the same time, what I learned in his classes doesn't match anything I learned in my life. For example, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 introduced me and many other Palestinian students in his class to Malcolm X. He taught us to be critical thinkers, and he opened, many windows for us to the outside world. He opened many doors for us. He connected us with websites. He trained us to be creative writers. I wrote a short story titled �umar X, which was inspired by Malcolm X, that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 encouraged me to write. And he published it in a book called Gaza Writes Back. You can see it in the background, Ali's background. And of course, he encouraged many others. There are like 22 young writers from Gaza who contributed to this book that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 edited. He also edited another book called Gaza Unsilenced. And as Ali said, he encouraged, I would say, hundreds of people, young people. The majority of young people you see today on social media writing in English are his students. So he trained an army of writers and bloggers to write and to tell the story. He has always been interested in storytelling, and we even memorize some of his sayings. Palestine is a story away. Palestine is a stone away, he says. And we're very much inspired by his work and his encouragement and guidance. Now many of his students, dozens of them, are PhD holders, teaching at different universities in the world. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 chose to stay in Gaza, and he has been very active, as Ali said, tweeting and telling the story from Gaza. He refused to move to the south. He's in Gaza City, and it's extremely difficult to be in Gaza City these days, especially that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has a family too. He's a father of 5, and he has to care for his family. He has to think about their survival. I also know 𝐓𝐡𝐞 as one of the greatest people with a sense of humor. He always cracks jokes, and we traveled together to the US in 2014 promoting Gaza Writes Back. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 missed many opportunities because of the siege imposed on Gaza. He couldn't travel. He also contributed a chapter to Light in Gaza, another book. And many of the people in the book actually are his students. So 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is everywhere. You remember when I first arrived in Malaysia, we happened to be on the same flight from Cairo. He took me in. I didn't have a place. I didn't think about a place at the time because I was just thinking about leaving Gaza. And it took me 5 weeks to do so. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 took me in his place for 3 weeks until I figure out my accommodation. And as I said, we traveled together. We toured the United States for 1 month back in 2014, where we met Ali for the first time. And I'm sure Ali, you still remember his jokes about the pizzas between New York and Chicago and the fight.
We took him to eat deep dish Chicago pizza, and he was very impressed with it, I think. He still talks about it today. In fact, he's still sending me pizza jokes from Gaza now, even as even though it's so hard to communicate. And I hesitate ever to mention pizza myself, because it's like, well, how am I going to talk about pizza in a situation where people don't even have bread? But he continues to make, he continues to have this humor. And I remember very well that trip, that photo there from when we met, and I remember we were together in Philadelphia also, and then again in Chicago. I didn't realize it was in 2014. It felt more recent, but I have very, very fond memories of that, and I'm just in awe of all the work 𝐓𝐡 continues to do under these conditions, and has been such an incredible resource, helping us to inform the world about what's happening in Gaza. I hope we'll have 𝐓𝐡 back on the live stream soon. I hope even more that we'll meet again. But I just wanted to, while we had you, Yusuf, to let people know more about this extraordinary person who means so much to all of us.
And I know Ahmed Masood, I brought him back on from backstage to talk also about his friendship with 𝐓𝐡. Ahmed, you want to chime in as well?
I've known 𝐓𝐡 for a long time. I mean, when I heard you guys talk about him, I was like, what, has anything happened to him? Because please don't, he's one of those people that he is amazing and so important to Palestine in general. He's got so much energy, so much creativity, so much influence around his humor, his humanity is just incredible. I met him in several locations, the last of which was in Gaza in May, and we were talking about creative stuff we wanted to do with the students, and he was telling me about the students in Gaza just want to read the textbook and memorize it. You can't memorize a Shakespeare's play, you have to understand it, you have to do it. And he was really angry, and I'm like, it's okay, it's fine, have some tea, it's all right. But so passionate about it. Some of the stuff he did before on like an exhibition on the role of women in Palestinian fiction. I mean, who does that in Gaza, to be honest with you? He's just always thinking of creative, different ways of presenting and engaging his students. And as Yusuf said, like kind of thinking outside the box and introducing new critical, creative thinking. I saw him in Malaysia as well when I visited there. He was doing his PhD. We went out on a ride as well, and in London, various locations. I think I hope that he's able to give us his voice, because I think it's really important and very unique, and I hope he continues to be well. I just messaged him now to say we're talking about you, so I hope you can see it.
Yes, and we're going to try and get 𝐓𝐡 Al-Aqsa back on as soon as we can, as soon as there's any let up in this just brutal insanity that we're seeing. Well, we're going to let Ahmed and Yusuf go, and we just want to thank you so much, Yusuf Al-Jamal, for all of the work that you do, and please keep us updated on your family. Of course, we'll have you back on very soon. And Ahmed, again, thank you so much. And the same, please keep us updated on your family. We're hoping that everybody stays as safe as possible these days. Thank you both.
Thank you both, and I hope we'll all meet again in happier times.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope so.
To enjoy some
Thank
pizza.
you for having us.
Yeah. This is the Electronic Intifada live stream. As we head into our second hour, we wanted to, of course, bring John in to talk, just as a change of pace, talk about where the resistance is at right now. We're seeing, of course, interesting developments in the north by Hezbollah in Lebanon against Israeli military installations. And as well, we're seeing some very interesting 𝐓𝐡 videos coming out, and information about how the resistance is confronting the Zionist enemy. John, give us a thumbnail sketch of what you've been tracking.
Well, yeah, what you said is right. I mean, there's resistance from the north to the south. In the north, Hezbollah has escalated their attacks from the north. The West Bank is, particularly the northern West Bank, is basically locked in daily armed struggle in Tubas, Tulkarem, Nablus, Balata, Jenin camp. I think any other time, like we've said before, we would be calling what's happening in the West Bank an intifada. And what we're seeing in Gaza is the defense of Gaza from this massive Israeli mechanized invasion that's now 3 weeks old. And we're seeing videos. We saw a bunch of videos released this weekend that showed that the fight is still happening in the outer edges. Israel hasn't been able to maintain control even over the outer edges in the northwest and the northeast of the Gaza Strip. We saw videos this weekend that showed multiple Israeli soldiers being killed. And Abu Ubaidah gave his audio message, and he told Israelis that word of their deaths would come to them eventually, suggesting that it's underreported, that Israel's underreporting their deaths, which is something that Hezbollah used to do, release videos and reports saying this is where your soldiers died, and then waiting for 2 days till Israel says, basically confirms what we saw. And so 𝐶 showed that in their videos this weekend. And then, sure enough, 2 days later, Israel admitted the deaths of 10 of their soldiers, 8 seriously wounded, fighting in northern Gaza. Israel doesn't tell us where or how they died in fighting. They've really been underreporting they haven't reported a wounded count, as we've talked about. And they often leak the deaths out like many days later, which sort of confuses which attacks you're looking at from the 𝐶 log and which ones the Israelis, because we've seen videos that surely look like killed in action. We saw the thermobaric grenade, the fuel grenade, be fired on a troop position in Beit Hanun with the soldiers sitting in the window. This weekend, we saw a video of an Al-Ghul sniper rifle hitting an Israeli soldier on foot in Beit Hanun, and then for the next half a minute, other soldiers come in to try to retrieve the body of the shot soldier, and they're getting shot. So we're seeing in these videos actual Israeli soldiers being killed and injured at a rate that the Israelis weren't acknowledging, although they did acknowledge the next day. So yeah, we've seen resistance from the north to the south. We're seeing, Abu Ubaidah said, 62 damaged or destroyed vehicles. I think damaged are a lot of them. Just in a 4-day window. Then yesterday they reported 25 vehicles hit. And that's because the Israelis have hundreds of armored vehicles inside the Gaza Strip that are being hit. And we can see by these videos that there's still street by street fighting. We're still seeing we're seeing 𝐶 fighters hitting Israeli armor point blank from behind, which again just suggests that the Israelis aren't dismounting from their armor. They're not holding any of these neighborhoods. You know, the military term is clearing, which has a military term that means that you've removed all resistance fighters from that area. And that's clearly not what's happening. We got reports in the Israeli media this weekend of a complex ambush on Israeli troops, where 360-degree ambush where, dozens of 𝐶 fighters and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 fighters, it was one joint operation, are coming out and hitting the Israeli armor in a 360-degree ambush, and then able to, under mortar fire, like complex combined arms actions, where the infantry and anti-tank units are hitting the tanks, and then the mortar units, the artillery units, are coming in and providing cover for them to then withdraw. So these aren't suicide missions. They're not martyrdom missions. They're these fighters hitting complex ambushes and then retreating back to their bases safely to carry out another attack. We're hearing reports because the Israelis are allowing some foreign press to embed and go in on these tours with them. And The Economist the other day talked about how he was in with an infantry battalion, which includes tanks and engineering units, but that these units aren't allowed to go down, that there's a standing order in the IDF that nobody is allowed to go down into the tunnels. And so essentially when they're finding these tunnels, they're basically just shelling and bombing from the air to close the entrances. They're not actually going into the tunnels to do what the thing that they promised that they were going to do, which was root out every Qassam fighter in the Gaza Strip. And we can see that map that Tamara just pulled up there. It doesn't look all that different from last week. Those pinch marks are the bites where they moved in to get the hospitals. And a lot of that blue shaded area are fiercely contested territories. The blue in the center there, in the center of Gaza to the east, is Juhar al-Dik and Zaitoun. There's reports of dozens of ambush attacks just on that axis each day. So that area is definitely contested area. In the northeast, that's where we see Beit Hanoun, and that's where those videos from this weekend were, where they're literally fighting from adjacent buildings. So they don't even control the building beside the building that they're in. And they took multiple casualties in Beit Hanoun. And then if you look to the east in the top left corner, the northwest corner, Beit Lahia, that blue that pushes down to those two encircled hospitals, that's the beach. That's not a built-up area. So they're going around the built-up areas. They're not able to control the built-up areas. That bite in the center on the left-hand side, that's the bite that they moved in to take Shifa through the unpopulated area of downtown where they blew up the Palestinian Legislative Council that hasn't met since 2006. And they planted a flag on top of it, even though nobody fought for that territory. Up there a little bit is where you see Shifa, where the Israeli soldiers from Flotilla 13, their best Navy SEALs, stormed the hospital and took photographs planting the flag on the roof of the largest hospital in Gaza. Those are the military successes that Israel has explained to us. They haven't explained any other significant military successes as their concerted structural attack on hospitals has been taking place. They're not hitting military victories where these hospitals are on the way to that military objective. Their objective is the hospitals. And there's fierce fighting. In many cases, there's more fighting today than there was the first days of the invasion. And I think in basic guerrilla warfare understanding, that makes sense. Once the Israelis get fixed positions, the attacks will come even more so than when you're attacking the sharp end of the invasion spear, which doesn't make all that much sense for a guerrilla army that's vastly outnumbered. And don't themselves have tanks and airplanes. Although we did see airplanes. We saw Qassam launch this weekend one of their suicide drones, their attack drones, which is basically a drone that acts like a missile, a kamikaze drone. We saw that be launched today or this weekend. We also saw a complex suicide bombing attack in the north, where 3 bombers went in carrying Yasin shells and thermobaric shells, as well as suicide vests, and hit an Israeli position in the north that we haven't got casualty reports, but we saw from the scene clearly casualties from that attack. We also saw videos with Palestinian fighters doing what we talked about before, where they literally take the Yasin warhead that acts like a grenade that has a pin, and we watch them literally walk up to the Israeli tank, put the device in between the reactive armor and the trophy system that knocks out incoming rounds, and slip it by hand right into that space below the turret, which is just like incredible courage for one thing. But it's just like a precision guided missile that's put in right in that spot in the tank turret. And again, that's partially showing you that the Israelis aren't outside of their tanks, because Palestinians are able to, we're just from these videos able to see that Palestinians are hitting them with complex ambushes. They're hitting them from behind. They're hitting them from close distances that are close enough for the trophy system to be ineffective. And we're seeing, what the Israelis said, that they lost 10% of their armors out of service 10 days into the ground operation. They haven't given numbers since then. But that kind of rate of attrition doesn't sound like much until you say, there's 700 or 800 vehicles. And then you're starting to talk about significant numbers just in the beginning of this war. The Israelis haven't even taken up their fixed positions yet, which will surely be hit harder. And even if you use Israeli numbers, which are clearly exaggerated and include massacring civilians, but they're only talking about a few thousand maximum number of fighters killed. And Israeli estimates themselves, suggest that there's as many as 40,000 Qassam fighters, particularly when you consider all of the national security forces that exist in Gaza themselves. Plus, you have the other factions that number in the tens of thousands. There's still a long way to go in this war for Israel to make any kind of claims of military success. There haven't been any. We've just seen concerted attacks on hospitals. And I mean, Abu Ubaidah said that. Well, he said, while we're fighting your tanks and causing losses, you're preoccupied attacking civilian infrastructure, talking about the Palestinian Legislative Council, and hospitals and civilians, just massacring civilians. There's no military objectives being reached that can be bragged about in any serious way. We see them in Shifa Hospital, raiding Shifa Hospital and being there for more than a week. And their evidence is, again, these phone calls, just really thin evidence.
Hold on, John. Hold on.
Okay.
We're going to get to some of that. But first of all, I just want to point out, if we can go back to the map, the blue areas represent areas the Israelis have entered. And on paper, which is what we're looking at, that looks like a lot. But I think I just want to emphasize the point I think I heard you making, which is that just because the Israelis are in those areas does not mean that they have secure control over them. And from the perspective of the resistance, they're not going to try to establish, a traditional front line with trenches and say, we're going to hold the Israelis here. In a guerrilla war, you actually can't stop the large conventional army from invading and entering your territory, nor would you try. But then what you do is you harass them, you ambush them, you come back behind them, you come up behind their lines, and you make it so that they can never relax for even a moment, because they never know where the resistance is. And some of the videos you talked about, which again, I apologize to our audience that we're not showing them because of the censorship on this platform, where when we have shown them on a previous occasion, our entire episode was deleted afterwards, and we want to keep it up for people to see. But John, you on your Twitter account, you do post some of these videos. Is that correct? So people can find them. Maybe we can put John's Twitter account up on the scroll at the bottom so that people can find them there. And some of the videos we've seen just in the last few days include on those occasions, as we've been saying now for a couple of weeks, the Israelis rarely, if ever, dare to get out of their tanks or armored vehicles. But what we saw is that on occasions when they have been targeted very precisely and very lethally either by Palestinian snipers, marksmen using high-powered rifles at a distance. And there was one video where at least one Israeli soldier was clearly killed in such an operation, and others where they have fired these thermobaric grenades into buildings that destroy an entire room. So that's one thing. But now, I think you're being very unfair to the Israelis, John. And I need to push back a little bit because you
As
said...
usual.
Yeah, as usual, John. You said that they've achieved nothing. Well, Ophir Gendelman, the Arabic language spokesperson for Benjamin Netanyahu, put out a video. I think also the Israeli army put out the same video or a version of it that we're going to take a look at now. And they're claiming that this is a tunnel near Al-Shifa Hospital. Now, remember, of course, that they claim that they claimed that there was this James Bond-like multi-level command bunker under Al-Shifa, and they did this very imaginative animation of it at the end of October. But let's look at what they say they found. I think we're able to run that video. Might take a second. Here we go. Yeah. So what we're seeing here, I'm going to narrate it, but tell me if
can you pause just for 1 sec before it goes down the hole? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So did you see the soldiers? If we could go back.
Maybe
if you
we'll
see
go
the
back,
soldiers, look to the left and watch the soldiers sitting there. So this is tunnel exploration for the Israelis. So there's 4 of them there playing on a joystick.
Right.
Driving a drone.
So this is clearly a drone because people don't tend to fly like this. So we can see, because we're coming in from above like this from the air, that this is a drone. And so let's let the video run. And we're going to go down. We're going down this mysterious shaft. We don't know what it is. Of course, Israel say it's a resistance tunnel, but as we know, there's underground infrastructure in Gaza City, just like in any other city. So we've seen manholes and cable shafts and fuel tanks, but this seems to be some kind of shaft going to the bottom. And then, so the drone gets down, it's got a light on it, and then something mysterious is going to happen in a few seconds when we see the drone is looking around, it's flying around, it's looking up the shaft. That seems like it's a spiral staircase or something. Not exactly sure, but let's keep watching. And then, yeah, it's looking around. So far, I don't see any. I don't see 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 or Mohammed down there. Don't see too much going on down there, but keep with it. The suspense is very... Oh, see what happened there? Tamara, can you go back a few seconds? Just a few seconds. All right. Yeah, watch this. Observe. Oh, the video was edited. And then let's let it run. What happens? Let's keep going. The video quality is now very different. It's a sort of a little grainier. But look, suddenly this drone that we saw flying in has grown legs, because you can clearly see that this is now a handheld camera. And you can see that as the video runs, it's moving from side to side as this drone magically grew legs and started walking through this tunnel. So I think and then I think it gets to the end of the tunnel, and they call that a blast door. That's what the Israelis have put on there. And a firing hole, that sounds very scary. We don't know what it is, and we don't know where this video is from. What we can say is that this video tweeted by Ofer Gendelman is 2 pieces of video that have been edited together. And in the first one, it's very clear that it's taken from a drone which flies. And the second part is something that has legs, whether it's the Yeti that you have up in Canada. Is that where the Yeti lives? Or perhaps a dog that has been trained to walk on its hind legs? Or
Well, they have dogs. They
they
send
do.
dogs.
We did see the fake dog video a couple of weeks back, also tweeted by Ofer Gendelman. But this didn't look like a dog. A dog seems to me like it would have moved more rapidly. But the point is, this is what they are putting out as their evidence. And so isn't that impressive to you, John? Doesn't that look like an underground Disney castle full of Hamas commanders and rockets? Were you not?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I noticed is that that's not underneath Shifa. So they made it sound like there was a command center, as if people were all going into Shifa down into this layer, and then all of a sudden they've cut out on the far corner of the campus something. We know the Israelis say that there's 1,300 tunnels. If you dig down in various spots in downtown Gaza City, you're presumably going to find a tunnel. I think the thing that's interesting to me, whether that video is fake or not, the things that stood out to me were that that's only 10 meters down, and they lost control of whatever that was, whether it was a robot, whether the drone had the ability to have legs that could move, because they do have robots that go down into these tunnels.
But they do not have flying robots that then sprout legs and walk through them. That they definitely don't have.
And we haven't seen those for sure.
We haven't seen those. But just to emphasize one point that we've made previously, and you've emphasized, which is that they do not go down the tunnels. They have a standing order not to go down the tunnels, and we saw in the first part of that video the soldiers sitting there on what looked like a picnic mat, posing for the
playing with a joystick, right?
Playing with the joystick. So that suggests to me that whatever that tunnel was with the mysterious creature on legs walking through it was, from what we know, where they haven't even said they've gone down tunnels. Like even the Israeli army, as far as I've seen in their briefings, have never said, we sent people down a tunnel. Yeah. So this is, again, to me, based on what we know, and based on the fact that Ofer Gendelman has lied so often, is another fake. And as you say, even if this was a tunnel, it's not under the hospital, and it's not a major command center, at least, anything.
And they're not going down into it. So if that's where they're saying their people are. Okay, so here's the things that I would see in that video. We without saying it's fake, the things that are in that video that are significant to me, that would be significant to all the 1,300 tunnels that span 500 kilometers, apparently, under Gaza, is that door that they showed, with that thick, heavy metal door with what they identified as a firing hole. That's very much true. There's doors all through the tunnel network that are so thick that you have to breach them with significant munitions. And they also have firing positions, which means, like, so imagine this view, imagine this is you, and then you show up on the door, they pop open that firing hole and shoot you. Or they rig the door so that when you try to blast it, it blasts backwards on top of you and buries you. So the Israelis have to first go down into the tunnel, which they're not doing. But then once they're down in the tunnel, they have this extraordinary task of being in that tiny space that's barely wide enough for one person. And then they have to bring all their munitions down there. And we can see with whatever robot that is that they've sent down there, at the end of this clip, you can see it drops off. The footage drops off because they lose connection with that device. See, it loses connection, which makes sense because they can't just send their drones an unlimited number of meters down. So when they see that firing hole, Palestinians can defend themselves through that hole. And then the Israelis have to figure out how they're going to breach that door, that thick, heavy metal door. And they have to breach that door in such a way that they don't alert the fighters on the other side that they're coming, that they don't blow it up too much, that they blow up everything on top of them. They can't really leave the tunnel to blow up the door, because once they do that, they've just cleared a path for the Palestinians to attack them. And at each, I mean, we don't know, we haven't been in the tunnels, but you can imagine that they have those big, heavy doors very often. That's a very important part of the defense of the tunnels, is to have those thick doors.
Which would also make it more complicated, even more complicated, if not impossible, going back to a discussion we had a few weeks ago, or what seems like a few weeks ago. It may have been last week, given how time stretches in this situation. But about the idea of flooding or flooding the tunnels with gas, that it would be very hard, even if those doors aren't airtight, which I assume they're not, it would still be very hard to get significant volumes of whatever it is you wanted to pump down there.
And the tunnels were built with that in mind, right? So when they're building the tunnel, they're imagining somebody coming down in the tunnel. What happens when they get here? What happens when they get to X, Y, Z place? And they have preparations for each of those. And so this idea that you're going to root out every fighter in Hamas, and this is what you're saying up on the above ground level, where you're massacring tens of thousands of civilians, to actually fight them on the underground level, it's a very, very difficult task. It's possible that that was a dog that we saw, but even sending dogs down, because the dogs need air at some point going down. So then you have to put masks on the dogs, and then they can't sniff as well. And so the dogs aren't even a good solution. All of the drone dropping out, or whatever that was dropping out, gives you a clue about how difficult communications are. They can't use their normal radios. They can't use their normal communication tools, but 𝐓𝐡𝐞 can, because they have an internally wired system under there. So they can communicate through the tunnels, in the tunnels, and the Israelis can't. Then the Israelis have to get enough people down there and enough explosives down there to explode that thick, heavy door, but not collapse the tunnel on top of themselves or trip a booby trap, which is another video that we saw last week. We saw the Israelis tripping a booby trap in Beit Hanun that killed 4 of them, because the tunnel entrances can be booby trapped. And then ultimately, when you get down to the final boss, like in the battle to get Yahya Sinwar, the people in the tunnel have the capacity to just blow the tunnel up as a mass casualty situation and just take every Israeli with them. And so there's a lot of very compelling military reasons why the Israelis are not going down into the tunnels, and why, because of that, there can be no military success that goes beyond killing people and evacuating a hospital and making people, like Ahmed and Yusuf, decide whether they're sick. Family members should go on the 10-kilometer death march. Those are the only successes that Israel can come up with, because the fighters are under the ground in these tunnels that have been built for this fight. That's what they're built for. And the Israelis are up on the top, sitting on the edge of the tunnel, flying. I mean, I'll give them that. The drone is impressive. You could see the drone hit the walls and not drop. So it's some kind of, it's not a quadcopter. It's not your regular drone, or it would have crashed. So they have fancy tools, But once it gets to 10 meters, they lost communication with that. And the Israelis themselves say the tunnels are 65 meters deep. And so it's not even close. It's not even like they're almost there. And that's why Ofer Gendelman putting out that video of the dog down there, like, it's just such a joke when you saw that fake video from a couple weeks ago, and then you compare it to those soldiers, sitting in a circle, looking like they're on a picnic mat, but they also had 4 guys pointing their guns around to make sure that they weren't ambushed, because it's resource intensive to carry out these operations around the tunnel. You have to bring troops in. You have to bring explosives in.
Well, it seems that they feel pretty safe around Al-Shifa Hospital, because the only people shooting guns around the hospital are the Israeli soldiers themselves. But John, can we shift to another? There's a couple of other things I want to ask you about, or talk to you about, that go back to October 7th. Now, we've talked about October 7th over the weeks. Of course, in the US and Western media, and of course, Israeli propaganda, they emphasize the atrocity propaganda. They don't talk about the military achievement of the resistance, which overwhelmed the Gaza division, took several of its bases and destroyed them, captured and killed Israeli soldiers, including senior officers and so on. And also, the drone footage that Hamas published at the time showed them using drones to drop bombs on sophisticated Israeli surveillance equipment, on automated machine gun nests, and other things, destroying tanks, dropping bombs on tanks. And I'm bringing that up because I don't know if it was ever really shown in Western media, but it is. There is this effort to overwhelm us with this atrocity propaganda about that Hamas went out to deliberately butcher as many innocent Israelis as they could. And we were the first English language publication at the Electronic Intifada to start kind of systematically taking that fake narrative. I'm going to call it a fake narrative because that was not the nature of the Hamas operation. It was a military operation in which certainly civilians were killed. That was the first big story we did on just over a month ago. But let's look at a couple of very recent stories just from the last few days. The first one we're going to look at is just from Friday. And there's a little video clip in that story, Tamara, that let's try to play. Just the clip that is embedded in that story of Mark Regev, who is one of the most well-known Israeli government spokespersons. And Mark Regev was speaking to Mehdi Hassan on MSNBC. It was a long interview of about 30 minutes. I watched the whole thing, but we'll just play that clip in the that's in the embedded tweet there, if we can, Tamara.
We had the number at 1,400 casualties, and now we've revised that down to 1,200 because we understood that we had overestimated. We made a mistake. There were actually bodies that were so badly burnt, we thought they were ours. In the end, apparently, they were Hamas terrorists. When we make a mistake, we admit it.
All right. So now what happened in that video is very interesting, very significant, because remember what we've been told since October 7th is that these monstrous ISIS-like Hamas people went in and burned. Netanyahu said that they bound people up and burned them beyond recognition. Never explained how they could have done that with the light weapons they had. No one has said that Hamas was carrying flamethrowers or napalm or whatever you would use that would be able to burn people to that extent. But just look at what Mark Regev said, because remember, we discussed in a previous live stream how Israel officially reduced its death count of its citizens or its civilians not civilians, its citizens, so it includes civilians and military, from 1,400, which is the number that the media have been repeating without any question. You know, everyone accepts their number, but they reduced it to 1,200. And what is Mark Regev's explanation for that? He says, you just heard it, that there were about 200 bodies that were so badly burned, we thought they were ours. But then after we did whatever, testing they did, they found out they were Hamas fighters. Now, how is it possible if they were Hamas fighters, how did they end up being burned beyond recognition? Nobody is suggesting that the Hamas fighters set themselves on fire. So they can only have been killed by Israel. And Israel knew that, but thought that many of them were Israeli civilians. So it means that Israel knew that they had indiscriminately fired on hundreds of people without knowing whether they were Israeli civilians or Palestinian fighters. And that is consistent with what we know about the weaponry that was in play. On the one hand, you had the Hamas fighters with AK-47s, or at the most rocket-propelled grenades. We did see some footage of Hamas fighters carrying, one or two rocket-propelled grenades on their back, but nothing. Tamara, are you able to zoom in on that photo at the top of the story that's on the screen? Or maybe it's clear enough for people. But this is a photo from Kibbutz Be'eri, and this is a photo of the aftermath. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that the Palestinian fighters were carrying that could have produced this kind of mass destruction in this kibbutz or the other settlements. This had to have been done with Israeli weapons and tank shells.
Yeah, there's especially that footage there. There's absolutely no question. We've seen the weapons that the Palestinians have. Like, they have thermobaric grenades that could burn people, but they wouldn't burn themselves. And they wouldn't, we've seen them on camera. We've seen, at this point, I don't even know how many. We've seen 25 or 30 videos of, multiple Yasin warheads being fired, and they're not taking down a building into rubble like that. No, I mean, it's quite obvious that the Israelis don't care about their captives. Like, they didn't care about them on October 7th, and they still don't care about them today. They're showing drone footage of them sitting outside of where they're claiming that their people are, but they're not going down day after day to go and get them. And we have to remember that on October 7th, that the Israeli army collapsed so thoroughly, that their communications were so thoroughly knocked out, that Palestinians took from Gaza, fighters came over and took more land inside Israel than all of the Gaza Strip in total territory. And we've seen videos from outside the rave where Palestinian fighters show up in their white pickup truck full of fighters, and they're like panicking, saying like, get out of my way, we're gonna run out of gas. Like, they didn't, their operation was so successful that they didn't think they would need as much gas to travel into the depths of the territory that they traveled into on that day. Israel had to move. We saw footage on that day of Israel moving their fighter jets because the Palestinians were getting into range of their main bases to take down their fighter jets. They had no idea what was going on the ground. They were in complete darkness because their communication systems were knocked out as part of this complex operation. And we know from Israeli testimonies that like some of the most lauded heroes on that day were officers who just drove in their own cars, excuse me, down to down to the area and saw another commander down there and said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I don't know what's going on. Okay, you take this sector, I'll take that sector." So they didn't have any kind of serious intelligence about what was going on for hours and hours. And
Right.
then they dispatched attack helicopters.
Well, I want to
and
come
start
to that. I
bombing
want
people
to.
from
I
the
want to
air.
come back to that, John. But first, I want to come back to the helicopters. But helicopters. But first, I want to go to this story. A story that we published on over the weekend. Tamara, that's yes, this story. Of course, it was this story that's on the Electronic Intifada, but it's based on a report that appeared in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, over the weekend, on Saturday, I believe it was. Let me just get to that on my screen so that I can give you the correct quote. So this story, on Saturday, Haaretz published a story about an Israeli police investigation of what happened at the supernova rave, where Israel says 364 people were killed on October 7th. And the first thing the Israeli, and then again, this is according to Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, on Saturday, the Israeli investigators concluded that Hamas fighters who crossed the boundary from Gaza that day had no prior knowledge of the music festival held near 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿, an Israeli colonial settlement a few kilometers east of Gaza. And now I'm quoting from Haaretz. According to a police source, the investigation also shows that an IDF combat helicopter that arrived to the scene and fired at terrorists there apparently also hit some festival participants. End of quote. That's the quote from Haaretz that became a major headline around the world and was taken, I think, correctly as the first official acknowledgement in Israel that the indiscriminate fire by the Israeli military would have ended up killing civilians. The Haaretz report really only contains one sentence about this, and it doesn't give any estimate of how many people might have been killed. It's just that one sentence that I read you. But now let's go, Tamara, to the Times of Israel story that I just sent you, which came out today, in which the Israeli police are trying to backtrack from this story. So this appears, or it's November 19th, so it appeared yesterday afternoon, where the police claim, they say, the Israel police issued a statement reacting to a claim in Haaretz that an IDF helicopter that arrived at the site of the Supernova Festival near Re'im on October 7th may have killed some Israeli civilians. It says, a police statement says that its investigation focused only and solely on police activity and not any IDF activity, and therefore did not provide any indication about the harm of civilians due to aerial activity there. So that's now an Israeli denial or an attempt to backtrack from the story, which made headlines around the world and which people interpreted as corroboration for many of the things that have been reported in recent weeks. But now let's get back to combat helicopters, plural, and let's go to the next story that I sent you, Tamara, which is one that we published, and I think we've talked about before, about a week or so ago on November 11th. And this story was based on a report that appeared in Yediot Ahronot, the Israeli newspaper, by its military correspondent, 𝐿 And Zitoun was citing an Israeli Air Force investigation or preliminary investigation into what happened on October 7th. And this is what 𝐓𝐡𝐞 said, or part of what 𝐓𝐡𝐞 said, that we did talk about this before, so I won't go through the whole thing again. But basically what 𝐓𝐡𝐞 said, and we have it all quoted in the story at the Electronic Intifada, is that the Israeli they sent up 24, actually 28 Apache attack helicopters, which were armed with Hellfire missiles and with 30 millimeter machine gun cannons, where each shell is like a grenade. That's the term that's used in 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿's article. And they were firing indiscriminately. And the term he uses, he says, the helicopters emptied their bellies. I never heard of a helicopter having a belly, but that's a very memorable term. And then they would go back and reload and come back. And so 28 helicopters constantly going, loading up with this heavy ammunition and firing indiscriminately, according to the Israeli Air Force's own preliminary assessment, that they could not distinguish between the civilians and Palestinian fighters. And this 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 article is accompanied by footage released by the IDF in mid-October, which actually shows the helicopters firing on civilian cars. It's actually the footage at the top of the screen, not this, although this little clip was released by the Israeli army, but the one right at the top that has the YouTube age restriction. We don't need to show it now, but it's there for people to find. Tamara, if you just show the headline again, people will be able to find it at the Electronic Intifada. So basically, given the context of everything we know up till now, John, do you find this attempt by the Israeli police to retract the revelation in Haaretz, do you find that to be credible? John, I think
you're muted, John.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. No, I think that they're going to do a lot of investigations that are going to show this stuff, because I think it's so obvious. That gun you're talking about on the Apache is one of the things that the Israelis asked for more of from the Americans. They're these massive 30 millimeter motor-driven cannons that just spray these massive munitions at people. And that's one of the things that the Israelis wanted the Americans to replace for them. No, they're clearly, I mean, you can clearly see the difference between what they're shooting and what came across the border, because we have videos of Qassam coming across the border in their pickup trucks. And then we have footage from in that story, from the attack helicopters clearly hitting like little tiny cars, like little Hondas or whatever. That have nothing to do with them. And then you see people getting out and running from them. Like 6-8 people in a tiny little car. The fighters aren't traveling like that. The fighters actually walked on foot. We've seen lots of videos of it. They walked on foot back to their base. So the thing about the rave, I think that's important to throw in there, is that the rave didn't, to say that they didn't plan on hitting the rave, I think makes perfect sense. The rave itself didn't know that it was going to be there in that location on Wednesday, like 48 hours before the Friday rave. They didn't know where the location of the rave itself was going to be. And so, and also, there's a lot of things there. There was a defense. The rave
reported, yeah. It was, just to add to that, John, it was reported in the Israeli media that the rave was scheduled. Remember, the Hamas offensive happened on Saturday.
Yeah.
And they said that the rave was scheduled for Thursday and Friday, and the decision to extend it to Saturday was a last-minute decision just because of popular demand.
And it was also initially located at a different location and was moved to that spot on the Wednesday. And so, I imagine about the day of the action, you could probably hear the Israeli trance music happening from there, but it's clearly not part of their plan. But they land, and that rave is literally between the Gaza Strip and 𝐓𝐻𝐿 military base, which houses the Gaza command. So that's right. So I guess in Israeli terms, they're using the ravers as human shields in front of their military installation, because that's the next target. When the dudes landed in the hang gliders, they weren't trying to land hang gliders in the Nova Trance Music Festival. They were landing hang gliders over the Israeli position that's on the road there, outside of the rave. And in that position outside the rave, there's armed security at that rave. And there's also a tank position that you can see at the rave. So these are defended areas that needed to be taken on the way to this military base. That was the home of the Gaza division, the most important objective of the operation. And the rave is in between that. And I think that the other thing that I think Abdul Jawad said it on the last show, if the goal was to create civilian massacres, the Qassam brigades held territory inside Israel for the entire day of Saturday. And in some cases, they held it for multiple days until Tuesday and Wednesday. The Israelis were saying they were still fighting people. If the goal was just to massacre civilians, and that was the only objective, they had the time and space to do that. And that's not what happened. Even at the rave, that's not what happened. There's tons of footage from the rave of them trying to figure out who's who. And in all fairness, a rave of 18 to 21-year-olds in Israel involves a lot of soldiers. It involves a lot of people that were about to become soldiers, were active duty soldiers, or had just finished their military. So they themselves, if they were settlers, they had weapons in their cars. A lot of people were running to their cars to get weapons. A lot of testimony from the Nova rave talks about crossfire, because there was security guards there that were shooting. And I think the rave signals more of chaos than anything else, because the numbers of people there, I don't think that Qassam anticipated how many people were going to be there. And when you look at the sort of meticulous takeover of each of those objectives that they had, what you see out front of Nova is a collection of many units that had cleared their own objectives and had moved forward in an attempt to take the base at 𝐓𝐻𝐿. So I think that the rave was in an unfortunate position. The Israelis panicked and opened fire with helicopter gunships, which the Palestinians expected. They came out expecting a battle. You can see units of Qassam fighters on October 7th that have MANPADS anti-aircraft weaponry, and they're constantly looking at the sky, even when they're riding their bikes out of Gaza, which we have from their helmet cam footage. The fighters are constantly looking at the sky as if they're expecting an Israeli air attack that never comes. The aerial attack doesn't come until a couple hours later, when they're firing randomly at people that they don't know, because they don't have people on the ground in the Nova Festival calling in coordinates on their radios like they normally would. So the helicopter pilots, and they testify to that, they didn't know what they were shooting at. They thought that they were shooting at 1,500 people that had fled across the border to fight. So I don't think there's any question that a certain number of Israelis were killed by their own forces on that day.
And we still don't know, and this is maybe a topic we should take up next time, but we still don't know how many Hamas fighters crossed into Israel, because Hamas hasn't told us, and we know the Israeli numbers are unreliable. So that's also another, the Israelis may have thought that there were 1,500 people.
Well, Abu Ubaidah said 1,500 people, but he didn't say, he said 1,500 people and 3,000 support troops. So we're not sure exactly what numbers went in and went out. And then we also know that once the wall had been breached in the 20 plus areas, that people from Gaza themselves could cross the border later in that day. So that creates a little bit of confusion. But what we're talking about and the story that you're reporting on, this is all happening before 11 a.m. in the morning. The operation starts at 6 in the morning, and that's all before noon. That they're shooting people at this festival, and the people at the festival are talking about how there's shooting happening around them, and there's crossfire, and people are trying to figure out where the shooting's coming from. It was a chaotic situation. But if the goal was just to massacre everyone at the festival, the Qassam brigades had the armaments to do that. That's clearly the goal wasn't mass killing. The goal was to take territory, hold it, and to bring home a certain number of prisoners.
John, before we wrap up, we should probably have you talk very briefly, although there's a lot going on, about significance of Hezbollah's attacks against the Israeli military infrastructure in the north of occupied Palestine. And kind of, you mentioned a little bit at the beginning about what's happening in the West Bank, but also regionally. I mean, Yemeni forces are getting involved. What's the significance of what we saw over the weekend?
Last weekend, Nasrallah said that there was going to be an increase in the quality and quantity of attacks, as well as the depth of attacks going deeper into Israel. And all of those things happened. We've seen Burkan rockets be fired, which can carry 300 kilograms of explosives. We saw one of those today hit an Israeli base in the Galilee. Hezbollah's released something like 50 videos of their anti-tank attacks across the border, their drone attacks. They've launched suicide drones that Israel had to use their most advanced air defense systems to shoot down. And then in the south, in the very south, Ansar Allah, who we know as the Houthis, had promised last week, Abdel Malik al-Houthi, the leader of Ansar Allah, said that they were going to take Israeli ships transiting the Red Sea. And then yesterday they did that. They boarded by helicopter, the Yemeni Navy boarded by helicopter this. It's unclear the provenance of the ship at this point, because we know that ships fly flags of convenience all the time. But the possibility of what that capability to really restrict Israeli commercial travel through that really important corridor is very significant. We also saw Ansar Allah down an MQ-9 Reaper drone, the best drone that the Americans have. That's also the same drone that the Americans were flying over Gaza. And Ansar Allah shot that down. So they're very much involved in this war from the south as well. And they're not, like, we see pictures of Ansar Allah fighters like in sandals or bare feet. They're kind of like guerrilla heroes fighting that way. But they also control the army now in the state. So they have a full, fully armed army. They're not guerrillas. They have surface to air missiles. They have drone swarms. We've seen, them attack Saudi Arabia with drone swarms and go through Saudi air defenses and hit Saudi oil installations. The Houthis, Ansar Allah, they have capacity to really hassle Israel and to make a southern front, a further southern front, a factor. And if Hezbollah is really going to continue this escalation in the north, the situation gets really dicey, I think, for Israel. And also when you add it to the armed struggle in the West Bank, tying down armor in the West Bank, tying down American and Israeli and American naval assets in the south and the Red Sea, using their most sophisticated air defenses to deal with Hezbollah drones and Houthi Ansar Allah drones. This kind of harassment and escalation for Israel is something that really challenges their ability to act like they have all the time in the world for this operation, that they have months and months where their shipping lanes are blocked, where their airports are closed down, where their people are living in bomb shelters constantly, where 360,000 of their workers are in reserve armies massacring civilians in Gaza. Their economy is not functioning the way it's supposed to. They have more than 100 evacuated villages and towns and cities in the north and the south. So those places aren't generating any GDP for their country. And they have to be paid by the state to live in these evacuation hotels. So Ansar Allah, Hezbollah, the uprising in the West Bank, those are all three significant fronts. The Americans getting hit in Iraq and Syria that we saw. The Americans admitted 50 attacks just the other day. This is a multi-front war besides the defense of Gaza that Palestinian resistance has really shown just remarkable courage and efficacy using indigenous-made weapons to confront the Israelis' most expensive armor.
Yeah.
And if I'll just add one quick thing, Nora, is that the images that are circulating this morning that are apparently of this Israeli military base in the north near the border with Lebanon show utter devastation caused by these Burqan missiles that Hezbollah apparently used. And I think and they show devastation on a scale far bigger than anything we've ever seen from any of the rockets fired by the Palestinian resistance. Is that correct, John?
Yeah, the Palestinians have a warhead that could be comparable to that, but
they
not
haven't
in
really
numbers.
But not in numbers. So my point here is that those images will certainly be concentrating minds in Israel about if these missiles were not hitting military bases, but hitting, say, industrial facilities or infrastructure or even towns and cities. But that's maybe something we'll come back to another day.
Lots to come back to. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but we wanted to just highlight some chats. The chats were again on fire today. Some really nice ones for all of our team. There is a comment from our good friend Tony Greenstein, giving some important historical context.
And Tony has written some great pieces for the Electronic Intifada over the years about these topics. So shout out to Tony for his important work.
Absolutely. And then a lot of comments in support of Ahmed Massoud and his family. And also as well to Yusuf, especially his friend and contributor to EI, who was killed with his family, Raed Kadura. Just lots of support, lots of new people joining this podcast. We really appreciate all of these comments and all of the support that we're getting. Please go ahead and like this episode. It helps us get around the YouTube censorship algorithms. And of course, go to our website at electronicintifada.net, sign up, subscribe to our mailing list right at the top. And also check out our updates section right there in red above Netanyahu's head on the front page, where you will see a scrolling feed of all of these news reports day by day. And as always,
you'll be able to read many of the fantastic, we talked earlier about 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and the amazing work he's doing in encouraging writers from Gaza and supporting them. And you will be able to read many of those articles. And I have to say, I'm not saying this to brag. I genuinely do not think there is any other publication in the world, at least in the English language, that is publishing so much writing that is coming from Gaza right now. You can only get that at the Electronic Intifada.
It's true. So if you appreciate this kind of reporting and the publication, go to our website, sign up to keep in touch with us. We will, of course, inform you about our upcoming live streams. And I just want to once again say our deepest appreciation and gratitude to Tamara Nassar behind the scenes, doing incredible production as well as incredible reporting. Tamara, thank you. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, John. Thank you to all of our viewers and listeners. And we will see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.